There was a time when the most important part of my day wasn't the morning, it was the night, because I was taught that what you do before sleep doesn't just affect your rest, it affects everything that comes after: your thoughts, your emotions, even the direction of your life. At the time, I didn't question it, because night feels different. Everything slows down, your guard drops, your mind becomes quieter, but also more open. And in that state, whatever you carry with you doesn't just stay on the surface, it goes deeper. I remember how intentional everything became before I went to sleep, not in a peaceful way, but in a controlled way. Every thought mattered, every action felt like it had a consequence. And over time, I started noticing something. The nights when my mind was unsettled, the next day felt heavier. The nights when I carried stress, overthinking, or negativity into sleep, I would wake up feeling the same way. Not refreshed, not clear, just continuing where I left off. That's when it started to feel like something more than just rest. It felt like a cycle. What you carry into the night carries into your next day. And once I saw that pattern, everything I did before sleep started to feel important. But here's what I didn't understand back then. It wasn't about unseen forces. It wasn't about something external happening while I slept. It was about what I was allowing to settle in my mind before I closed my eyes. Because your mind doesn't just turn off when you sleep, it continues processing, and whatever you give it before rest, it works on it. That's what makes this so important, because most people don't pay attention to those final moments before sleep. But those moments set the tone for everything that follows. The first pattern I started to notice was something almost everyone does: going to sleep with a crowded mind. At the time, I didn't think it mattered. I thought sleep would reset everything, but it doesn't. It carries things forward. I remember nights when my mind wouldn't slow down, thoughts moving from one thing to another, problems, conversations, things that didn't go right, things I needed to fix. And instead of stopping them, I followed them. I kept thinking, analyzing, replaying, until eventually I fell asleep. But the sleep wasn't deep, it wasn't restful. And the next morning, I didn't feel clear. I felt like I had been thinking all night. Because, in a way, I had. That's what a crowded mind does. It doesn't stop when you close your eyes. It continues in the background, processing, repeating, carrying the same tension forward. I started noticing a pattern. The more I went to sleep with unresolved thoughts, the more those thoughts stayed with me the next day. Small problems felt bigger, decisions felt heavier, focus became harder, and it created a cycle. You think too much at night, you wake up unclear, you carry that into your day. Then you repeat it again. At the time, I thought something deeper was happening. But later, I understood something simple. Your mind needs space to reset. And if you fill it with noise right before sleep, it doesn't get that space. That's the first thing you have to stop. Not thinking completely, but carrying unnecessary mental noise into the night. Because whatever fills your mind before sleep shapes how you wake up. The second pattern was even more subtle, but more damaging over time. Ending the day with negativity, not intentionally, not in an obvious way, just small things that seem normal. Replaying what went wrong, thinking about what didn't work, focusing on mistakes, frustrations, or things you wish you could change. I remember doing this without even realizing it. Lying down and going over the day in my head, but only the parts that felt incomplete or negative. What I said wrong, what didn't go as planned, what could have been better. And the more I focused on those things, the heavier my state became. That feeling didn't stay in the moment. It followed me into sleep. And the next day, I would wake up already carrying that weight. Not because something new had happened, but because I had carried the previous day forward. That's how this pattern works. Your mind holds on to what you focus on last. If the last thing you focus on is frustration, that's what your mind continues to process. If the last thing you focus on is stress, that's what stays active in the background. At the time, I thought this was something deeper, like something affecting my rest from the outside. But later, I saw it clearly. It was simply continuation. Your mind doesn't separate your day from your night. It continues whatever you leave unfinished. And when negativity is the last thing you hold on to, it becomes the starting point of your next day. That's why this matters. Because it's not about being positive all the time. It's about what you allow to settle as your final state. If that state is heavy, you carry it forward. If that state is clear, you wake up differently. That's the second thing to stop, not because it's dangerous, but because it quietly shapes everything that comes after. The third pattern was something I didn't take seriously at all, but it had one of the strongest effects. Using your phone until the last second before sleep. It feels normal. Scrolling, watching something, checking messages. Just one more minute. That turns into 20. I used to do this every night, and I thought it helped me relax. But when I looked closely, I saw something different. My mind wasn't slowing down. It was staying active. Every video, every message, every piece of information was adding something new to my thoughts. Even if it felt small, it kept my mind engaged. And then I would go to sleep immediately after. No pause, no space, just straight from stimulation into sleep, the result. My mind never had time to settle. I would fall asleep, but not deeply. And when I woke up, I didn't feel clear. I felt like my mind was still processing everything I had just consumed. That's the problem. Your brain needs a transition, a moment to slow down. But when you use your phone right up to the last second, you remove that transition completely. You go from high stimulation to forced rest, and your mind doesn't switch off instantly. It carries that activity into sleep. At the time, I thought this was just a habit, but later, I realized how much it affected everything: focus, energy, clarity the next day. Because when your mind is overloaded before sleep, it doesn't reset properly. And when it doesn't reset, you don't start fresh. That's the third thing to stop. Not using your phone completely, but giving your mind space before sleep. Because without that space, your rest is never complete. The fourth pattern was one I ignored for a long time because I thought it was normal. Sleeping with unresolved tension. Not physical tension, mental and emotional tension. I remember nights where something felt off. Maybe a conversation didn't go well. Maybe there was something I was avoiding. Maybe there was a decision I didn't want to face. And instead of dealing with it, I pushed it aside. I told myself, I'll think about it tomorrow. And then I went to sleep. But something interesting would happen, even though I wasn't thinking about it consciously anymore. It didn't disappear. It stayed, a quiet pressure in the background. And the next day, it was still there. That's when I started to understand something. Your mind doesn't resolve things just because you ignore them. It holds them. It keeps them active in the background until you face them. And when you go to sleep with that tension, your mind continues processing it. Not clearly, but in a scattered way, which is why you wake up feeling heavy, even if you don't know exactly why. I experienced this again and again. Unresolved thoughts turning into unclear stress. Small issues turning into bigger mental weight. And over time, it built up. At the time, I thought something deeper was happening. But later, I saw it clearly. Nothing external was causing it. It was simply unfinished mental loops. Things I hadn't closed. Decisions I hadn't made. Thoughts I hadn't processed. And sleep doesn't close those loops for you. It carries them forward. That's why this matters. Because going to sleep is not just about rest. It's about what you carry into that rest. And if what you carry is tension, that tension stays active. That's the fourth thing to stop. Not having problems, but leaving them completely unacknowledged before sleep. Even a small moment of clarity, recognizing it, deciding when you'll deal with it, is enough to reduce its weight. Because once your mind knows it's handled, it can finally settle. The fifth pattern was the most overlooked because it doesn't feel like a mistake. It's simply the absence of something. Lack of intention before sleep. Most nights, I didn't end my day consciously. I didn't decide how I wanted to close it. I didn't choose what state I wanted to carry into rest. I just drifted into sleep One moment I was thinking about random things. The next moment I was asleep. No direction, no clarity, just whatever thoughts happened to be there at the time. And that's the problem. Because if you don't choose your final state, your mind will choose it for you, based on whatever was strongest in that moment. Stress, distraction, random thoughts. And those become the last thing your mind processes. I started noticing the difference when I became intentional, even in a simple way, taking a moment before sleep to slow down, to decide how I wanted to feel, to bring my thoughts into a clear, calm state. It didn't take long, but it changed everything. Because instead of going into sleep with random mental noise, I was going in with direction, and that direction carried forward. I would wake up clearer, more focused, less reactive. At the time, I didn't realize how important this was. But now I understand it clearly. Your mind follows the last instruction you give it. If that instruction is unclear, your rest becomes unclear. If that instruction is intentional, your rest becomes more stable. That's the fifth thing to stop. Not sleeping without effort, but sleeping without awareness. Because those final moments before sleep set the tone for everything that follows. The sixth pattern was one of the most powerful because it didn't just affect sleep. It affected how I felt the entire next day. Feeding your mind with fear before sleep. I didn't recognize this at first because it didn't feel like fear. It felt like information. Watching intense content, listening to negative stories, thinking about worst case scenarios. It all seemed normal. But I started noticing something. The nights I filled my mind with heavy, negative input. My sleep felt different. Not always restless, but uneasy. And the next day I carried that same feeling. A subtle tension, a slight unease, a sense that something wasn't right, even when nothing had actually happened. That's when I understood something important. Your mind doesn't filter emotional intensity before sleep, it absorbs it. And whatever you give it, it continues processing. So if the last thing you focus on is fear, your mind stays in that state. It doesn't just disappear when you fall asleep. It carries into your rest and into your next day. At the time, I thought something external was affecting me. But later, I saw it clearly. I was feeding my own state. I was giving my mind the exact input that created that feeling. And then wondering why I felt that way afterward. That's how powerful this is. Because your mind is highly receptive before sleep. Whatever you expose it to in those final moments becomes part of your internal state. That's the sixth thing to stop. Not being aware of the world, but choosing what you allow into your mind before rest. Because what you consume at night, you carry into the next day. The last pattern was the most subtle, but it ties everything together. Ignoring your final thought before sleep, Most people don't even notice it because it happens in seconds. You're lying down, your eyes are closing, your thoughts are slowing, and right before you fall asleep, there is one last clear thought. Most of the time, it's random, uncontrolled, just whatever happens to be there in that moment. But that thought matters more than you realize because it becomes the final signal your mind receives before it shifts into rest. And your mind holds onto that signal. I didn't understand this before, but I started noticing a pattern. On nights when my last thought was unclear, worried, or scattered, my sleep felt disconnected. And I woke up with that same feeling. But on nights when I was aware, when I intentionally brought my mind to a calm, clear state before sleep, everything felt different. My rest was deeper. My thoughts were quieter. My mornings were clearer. That's when it became obvious. Your final thought is not just a moment, it's a direction. It tells your mind what to carry into rest. And most people never control it. They leave it to chance. And when you leave something that important to chance, you get inconsistent results. At the time, I thought something deeper was happening, but the truth was simple. My mind was just following the last thing I gave it. That's all. That's the seventh thing to stop. Not sleeping naturally, but ignoring what you're carrying into that final moment. Because once you become aware of that, you can change it. And when you change that final thought, you change how you rest and how you wake up. Once I began to stop these 7 patterns before sleep, everything shifted. It wasn't instant. It wasn't flashy, but it was undeniable. I noticed the mornings first. I woke up lighter, clearer, less tangled in the residue of the previous day. Decisions became easier. Focus became sharper. And small frustrations that used to linger overnight no longer followed me into the next day. But it wasn't just the mornings. My energy throughout the day changed. I didn't feel weighed down by invisible tension anymore. Even my relationships improved because I wasn't carrying unconscious stress into every conversation. And here's the key lesson. It's not the rituals. It's not the objects. It's the awareness. When you stop going to sleep with a crowded mind, with negativity, with fear, when you pause your phone, acknowledge unresolved tension, set intention, and control that final thought, you reclaim your nights. You reclaim your energy. You reclaim your peace. I realized that sleep isn't just rest. It's preparation. Preparation for your next day, your next week, your next breakthrough. And once you take control of these final moments before sleep, you stop giving away your power. You stop letting unconscious patterns dictate your mood, your focus, and your clarity. Everything begins to move differently. Your mind, your energy, your decisions, all of it aligns with intention instead of chaos. That's why this matters. Because what you do before sleep isn't just about rest. It's about shaping the life that follows. And once you understand that, you'll never approach sleep the same way again. Now that you understand the 7 things to stop, the question is simple. How do you take control tonight? It starts with awareness. Before you lie down, pause. Take a deep breath. Notice what you are carrying into rest. Your thoughts, your emotions, your distractions. Then take action on the patterns we've discussed. Clear your mind. Let go of unnecessary thoughts. Acknowledge them, then set them aside. Release negativity. Stop replaying mistakes or frustrations. Recognize them, then choose calm. Step away from screens. Give your mind a chance to slow down. No phone, no notifications, no endless scrolling. Address tension, acknowledge unresolved issues. Even a small decision or plan to handle them tomorrow is enough. Set intention. Decide how you want to feel as you sleep. Peaceful, focused, ready. Avoid feeding fear. Don't consume disturbing content or stress-inducing information. Protect your mind from unnecessary worry. Control your final thought. Choose a clear, calm, empowering thought as you drift into sleep. This is the final direction you give your mind. Doing this consistently changes everything. Your sleep becomes restorative. Your mornings become energetic and focused. Your days unfold with clarity instead of chaos. I've lived both sides of this: restless, heavy nights and intentional, controlled nights. The difference is undeniable. And this isn't about perfection. You won't get it right every night, but even small steps make a difference. Even awareness alone starts shifting the cycle. Tonight, choose intention. Tonight, stop the 7 patterns that steal your rest. And tomorrow, watch how your life feels lighter, clearer, and more aligned. Because sleep isn't just a pause, it's a powerful tool. And once you master these final moments before rest, you reclaim not just your night, but your destiny. There's something even deeper that most people miss. When you consistently carry cluttered thoughts, fear, or tension into sleep, it doesn't just affect your mind or energy, it affects your spirit. I've seen it in my own life. Nights filled with unresolved issues or fear didn't just leave me tired, they left me spiritually drained. I felt blocked, stagnant. Even my prayers felt heavy, as if something invisible was weighing on me. But the nights I implemented these 7 changes, it was different. I woke up not only clear and energized, but spiritually lighter. My connection felt stronger, my intuition sharper. Doors that felt closed began to open. Opportunities I didn't expect began to show up. This isn't coincidence. Spiritually, the night is a time when your soul aligns with your life path. If your mind is chaotic, heavy, or filled with fear, it disrupts that alignment. It creates an invisible resistance to blessings, breakthroughs, and clarity. When you go to sleep intentionally, when you release fear, negativity, and tension, and when you control your final thought, You create a space for spiritual restoration. You allow divine clarity to settle in. You reclaim your nights as a sacred time, not just for rest, but for protection, alignment, and breakthrough. This is why these 7 habits matter more than you realize. They aren't just mental practices, they're spiritual safeguards. And once you start respecting this time, you'll notice doors opening, sometimes in ways you didn't even think were possible. Sleep becomes more than sleep. It becomes a weapon against stagnation, a shield against spiritual attacks, and a launching point for the destiny you've been waiting for. By now, you understand the 7 patterns to stop and the spiritual weight they carry. But knowledge alone isn't enough. You need consistency. The real transformation comes when you make this intentional approach to sleep a nightly habit. Start small. Even one night of awareness and action creates a shift. 2 nights deepen it. But over time, it becomes natural. Create a simple routine. Pause and breathe. Give yourself 1-2 minutes to step out of the chaos of the day. Reflect and release. Acknowledge what's unresolved, but choose to set it aside. Step away from stimulation. No phones, no screens, no outside noise. Let your mind and spirit settle. Set your intention. Decide your final mental and spiritual state before sleep. Peace, clarity, readiness for breakthroughs. Feed your spirit. End the day with a positive thought, a short prayer, or a declaration of protection. Control your final thought. Make it clear, calm, and empowering. This becomes the direction your mind carries into rest. Do this consistently, and you will notice profound changes. Your sleep will deepen. Your mornings will become sharper. Your spiritual awareness will expand. And your life will begin to move differently. Because every night you carry chaos into sleep, you give away power. Every night you carry intention, peace, and awareness, you reclaim it. This is how you take control of your nights, your mornings, and ultimately your destiny. Start tonight. Make these steps a ritual. Protect your sleep. Protect your mind. Protect your spirit. And watch as the unseen forces that were holding you back begin to fall away.